some good ceremony. Just like there is essential complexity, there is good ceremony. Things like this. Stand-up meetings in an agile project is a good kind of ceremony because it reinforces what everybody's doing. But when ceremony turns bad is when it turns into a cult. And that, unfortunately, is a little bit of what's starting to happen just a bit in the Scrum world. They're doing a lot of, still agile development, but as soon as Scrum certification came in and the Scrum recertification, and people are making money off of certifying people, there's nothing wrong with Scrum itself, but there's some kind of scary cult-like things starting to happen there. Here's another example. This is from Jakarta Commons. This is the isBlank method. Java doesn't have an isBlank method on its string. And you can't subclass string to add an isBlank method because it's final, it's locked down. And you can't change the string source because you can't get access to it. You can't even use aspects to add this very easily because of all the security sandbox stuff that's there. So you end up switching to procedural code that looks like C to add an isBlank method. Here's the same blank method in Ruby, where you can reopen the string class and add a new method. The question mark's part of the method name. What's the definition of a blank string? It's either if you strip away all the blank spaces or all the spaces, it's empty, or it's just empty, has no space, has nothing in it whatsoever. But that's almost too easy as a comparison between ceremony and essence. Let's do this. This is JMock. This is how you do mocking in Java, the state-of-the-art mocking framework. And it's got this crazy anonymous inner class with an instance initializer, the two double curly braces there. This is basically the constructor of the anonymous inner class, because you can't actually create a constructor for an anonymous inner class, because what are you going to call it? The constructor has to have the same name of the class. So you have to use this instance initializer. So there's a bunch of really crazy complexity here just to do mocking. You can actually write that exact same mock test using JRuby with this, using Mocha, which is a mocking framework in the Ruby world. This is the exact same, literally testing exact same Java classes, way simpler, because you just say, okay, this warehouse stubs these methods and returns this kind of value. But here's what's interesting about that. At the end of the day, you have to get done what you have to get done, and overly restrictive languages and environments that put up roadblocks to prevent you from getting done what you have to get done just make it harder to do things. So I did a little experiment. I counted the number of lines of code in JMock versus the number of lines of code in Mocha. And it turns out that JMock has 17,152 lines of code and Mocha has 2,245. So JMock has 7.5 times as many lines of code to do the exact same job. Actually, it's a subset. Mocha is more powerful than JMock, but we'll just let it go at that for now. But you say, well, lines of code, that's not a very good metric. Lines of code is kind of a crummy metric. So let's do psychometric complexity, which is a little better metric. And it turns out, remarkably similar, psychometric complexity for JMock is 2,349 and is 323 for Mocha. So JMock has 7.2 times the complexity of Mocha. We need powerful languages that get out of our way because the lockdown experiment has failed. You can't lock down and still let people get stuff done. And what you end up doing is putting roadblocks and making it really hard for people to actually get stuff done. Which would you rather maintain, a 2,000 line code base or a 17,000 line code base? Because at some point, just the bulk of that makes it really hard to get anything useful done. The problem is these really ceremonious languages put a huge amount of distance between intention and result. And what's in the middle is a bunch of accidental complexity. What we'd like to do is shorten the distance between intention and result and allow us to get more done with less work. Which is pretty much what he was talking about in Mythical Man Month. The way that developers, really good developers, are way better than average developers and can get more done if you give them the right tools. So I believe that the days of 200 developers, mostly service and ceremony, are going to come to an end because the companies that are doing that view software purely as overhead. The companies that are going to do better and eventually beat them in the market are small, agile teams of really smart developers. You can replace those 200 average developers with 15 good developers, and they'll produce more code faster than 200 will, using essential languages. There's been a bunch of talk about those today. There's Ruby, there's Groovy, there's Python, there's Scala, all of these modern languages that don't suffer from some of the deficiencies of the decade-old languages. And using proven development techniques like agility, with an understanding of lore. What's going to happen is what we call enterprise development now, and what I'm calling the new efficacy, are going to separate. And in fact, the guys who are doing new efficacy are going to accelerate away from the people who are doing traditional enterprise development, servicing ceremony and accidental complexity. And enterprises that embrace new efficacy compete better and eventually displace their competitors in the market because they're using it strategically, software strategically. Remember the TSR problem we talked about before? It is actually remarkably similar to the problem we're trying to solve with SOA now, which is this highly coupled, all these applications talking to the same database structure problem. And we're going to solve it the same way we did the TSR problem, which is to invent an event-driven operating system. Because that's what eventually killed the TSRs, was an actual event-driven operating system. And you can do that too. In fact, Ruby on Rails was really adamant when it came out that says one application, one database. And if you need to share information, you do it at the application level in very coarse-grained messaging. And that's what we're kind of discovering in the rest of the world is, hey, that's kind of right. Because having all this coupled mess at the data level means it's impossible to change anything, and it means that all your infrastructure is very tied down to decisions that were made a decade ago. Now, I understand I'm talking to a group of developers, and all of this stuff to you is about as obvious as saying that Angelina Jolie is pretty. It's about as obvious. I always have really slow fades on the Angelina picture. I just can't help myself. It's about as obvious as saying that kittens are cute. But you know what kittens, you know what happens to kittens when they grow up? They get serious. And we need to do that too. As developers, we need to stop listening to management tell us stupid things that we know are wrong. So how do you sell this idea of new efficacy and let's stop doing stupid things? The problem is most of the way that we've been interacting with most of the enterprise world, especially in the kind of open source essential languages communities like Ruby on Rails and Python and Groovy and all those guys, mostly we've been kind of interacting with the enterprise like this. And we need to soften this some. Let's see if we can soften this and make it a little more corporate. Maybe like this. Hey, they're wearing suits now, and it's two people, you know, a man and a woman. That's a little softer. What about this? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Soften the message even more, but this is actually the entirely wrong approach. We need to seduce them. And the way that we need to do that is to actually solve problems in ways that doesn't obviously cause new ones. If we can show them that we can get stuff done using all of this new efficacy stuff, they'll let us keep doing it more and more. One of the things that I'm really fond of is this idea of polyglot programming, leveraging existing platforms with languages better suited to particular tasks. I think we're coming to the end of the days when there's one true language to rule them all, that every single thing should be written in Java, and every single thing should be written using EJBs and portlets and all that crazy stuff. There are better tools for certain problems. You keep seeing these layered applications like this that just make my eyes bleed. What I want to see is a layer that looks more like